Hello, my name is Nathan Phan, and today I will be presenting my semester project titled A War on Fertilizer, an Ecological Perspective. Starting off with just a case study, some of you may have heard, whether on the news or social media, that what's been going on this summer on the coast of Florida, where you have these kind of pools of red, opaque water. Um, it's completely wreaking havoc. There's been cleanup efforts, and as a result, hundreds of thousands of fish are being washed up onto shore, and they're dying on the surface of the water, and it is a complete mess right now. And it segues into this presentation, and we'll get why that is happening. So, a bit of background on me, why I would even care to do a research project on fertilizer or these kind of adverse effects. By training, I am a genetic engineering student. I've done my last 2 years of research on the nitrogen cycle and zebrafish uh, physiology. The topics we're gonna kind of cover in this presentation are going to be what are runoffs, what ecological effects do they have, the present day relevance, as you can already may tell, and the potential solutions. So a bit of background: agricultural runoffs, or runoffs in general, are basically water that comes from farms due to watering, snow, rain. That water is then absorbed into the soil and then transported, whether through just flowing naturally or evaporating into bodies of water. The problem with this, though, is that often farming practices use chemical grade fertilizer. These fertilizers are going to be rich in nutrients and nitrogen, which are great for farming and plants, but will have an adverse effect if they get into water. So the result is you'll have these rarely high nutrient dense runoffs that eventually find their ways that connect all the way to larger bodies of water that include the Gulf of Mexico and, as we've talked about before, the coast of Florida. The reason why it happens and it's allowed to happen is currently there are no regulations on farming practice at a federal level. Each state kind of decides its own rules, and there's no law, right, amount against the amount of water you're allowed to water your plants, which kind of sounds silly, but when every farm is doing it, it can add up. There's no law against where farms can really be, and there's some kind of zoning laws, but none that prohibit them from being really close to bodies of water. And one thing I wanted to stress in this presentation is that farmers are not the villains here. They are an essential part of our society. Runoffs can happen naturally, but never to this level. Fertilizers are often a really important tool in our farming and our agricultural practices. And we mainly want to look at why there are no incentives in place for more clean agricultural practices. So, what are the effects, right? In the short term, like I said before, nutrients will run off into these bodies of water. These nutrients, right, will promote the growth of algae, right? They're lipoplanktons and plants that will need algae to grow. Um, but these algae will block off sunlight, inhibit it, and lower the oxygen of the water. The short-term effects is that some fish will die because fish need oxygen. But on a larger scale, you'll get things like what we mentioned before in the coast of Florida, where it can happen, where you can start to see a diminish in the species population. It completely degrades and destroys that natural habitat and changes the biodiversity and food chain within. A big example of this, and kind of another case study I wanted to bring up, was right now there's something called the dead zone that is happening on the Gulf of Mexico. Florida, for example, is still really early on. It's just happening this summer, but the Gulf of Mexico has been it's years of runoffs that has caused a basically oxygen dead zone where it is just very hard for organisms and native species to thrive, and populations are decreasing, and this is having an adverse effect on the plant and wildlife there. So why do we care? Well, you might care because you're just an avid fish fan and or plankton fan or whatever, and you care because next time you visit Florida on a vacation, you won't see as many cool fish. You might care because you might think you not have might not have to care because you live in Minnesota where it doesn't happen much, but I stress that it happens everywhere. Where there are large bodies of water, these runoffs happen and they can destroy a natural habitat. We should care as a general society because making our governments and fertilizer companies and farmers just more accountable, regardless of the impact they have, is just better for us. Especially now, if you're a fisherman or a conservationist or environmentalist, you care about preserving, and your work is in making sure these populations aren't being decimated, and there are consequences that come along with it. And lastly, if all you care about is financial costs, the cleanup for this, as we've already seen on the news in Florida, is expensive, up to the hundreds of thousands of dollars of cleanup. So, what are the potential solutions? Well, one, we as a society need to make a collective decision that this cannot happen, and we need to bring up a united front against the farming industrial sector, and especially towards the governments who regulate this. Tighter regulations need to be have on irrigation, the amount of water you can have, fertilizing timing, whether if the snow in the spring is about to melt and all this water is about to be absorbed into the soil, we don't want that to be the time where fertilizers are being used at the highest amount. And lastly, land proximity. You know, tighter regulations on moving farms away from these connecting bodies of water. And I guess I understand that seems counterintuitive since you're growing plants that need water, but the effects are real and they need to be addressed. Lastly, the biggest things are farmers need to be incentivized. There are clean agricultural fertilizers and practices out there, but farming is expensive, and at the government and local level, they need to be incentivized, and we can't fault them for caring about their bottom line. So thank you, and together I believe we can make an effective change.